Thanks again for joining us. It's going to be a very brief overview of some of our most common turf diseases here in Nebraska. And first question is why does it even matter what disease we're looking at? You know, here in this on this title slide, I have a lot of different fungi that are showing up. And why does it matter which one it is? You know, we can just go and apply that same broad spectrum fungicide for any of them, right? Well, it's not quite as easy as that. So diagnostics really do matter. You know, a lot of those broad spectrum fungicides for general turf diseases they do help prevent a broad range of turf diseases, but not all of them. And so it's really important to know which disease we're working with before we ever want to start to implement some sort of management strategy. And the other reason why it's important to have the correct diagnoses and why maybe samples should be sent into a diagnostic clinic and not just looking at pictures online to see what's going on is that pathogens can't read. And so fungi can't read, insects can't read either. And when we have new cultivars and some of these unusual weather patterns that we've been seeing, that often means that we have maybe some new diseases showing up, or at the very least, different symptoms than we are used to seeing for a lot of these. And so the first one we'll look at is, so we have some aerial mycelium that's growing in a lawn. So okay, if there's mycelia, we definitely know that it is some sort of fungus or fungus-like disease. But when we zoom in, we're not seeing any lesions or anything like that. And there are three different diseases that can all cause the same sort of structure. Maybe it's dollar spot, maybe it's brown patch, maybe it's pythium blight. One of these diseases does not really require a whole lot of fungicide applications. It can best be controlled through nitrogen. Another one of them really does need one of your broad spectrum fungicides. And the third one is unaffected by some of these broad spectrum fungicides. And we need a different sort of product to be used for that. So it really is important to know what is causing that fungal growth before we start applying anything. And whenever we're thinking about diseases, it's always helpful to be thinking about symptom distribution. And so really on three different scales. So first, across the entire landscape or lawn, what does it look like? Do we have a big ring that's appearing? Maybe we have some smaller patches that are showing up. Once we've assessed injury on the landscape level or the lawn level, then we always want to look at the entire plant. And so where on the plant are we seeing injury occur? Is it primarily affecting the foliage, so the blades, or maybe it's in the crown, or maybe we're seeing this disease on the root system. And different diseases will tend to attack different parts of the plant. And knowing which part of the plant they're attacking can really help us narrow down what disease we're looking at. And then finally, we always want to look at then the individual plant parts and see, okay, so we have a disease that's attacking the blade. What does that disease look like on the blade of grass? Do we have small spots, or maybe we have larger lesions that are occurring? So the first disease I'm going to talk about is brown patch. Brown patch is probably one of our most common turf diseases. I'm in the state of Nebraska. There is a lot of brown patch occurring right now as well. There's a lot of disease pressure earlier. I have gigantic swaths of my lawn that are being very severely affected by this organism. And so this disease is caused by the fungus Rhizoctonia solani and typically shows up kind of late June, mid to late June. through August. If we continue to have really hot weather through August and September, we can see this disease showing up as late as into September as well. But this one, it really likes that hot, humid weather, and then especially of that lush growth. And so this disease really does a good job of attacking that new foliage that is growing. As we think about a lot of our lawns in Nebraska, especially with a lot of our cooler season turfs, they're going to be growing pretty well kind of through June, July, and into August. And one of the diagnostic symptoms of brown patch tends to be these tan, irregular shaped lesions that have this dark brown border on them. That's what you see early on. Now the picture behind me, I'll duck my head so people can see it maybe a little bit better, but this is a little bit more of a severe infection, and it's hard. Sometimes it can be hard to see those individual lesions on the leaf blade. But that's where the name actually then comes from, is once we have a larger area of the turf affected, then we tend to get these larger patches that can die. And so as far as managing this disease, one of the biggest things that we want to do is to promote vigorous growth of your turf. The slower our turf is growing, the more severely affected it's going to be with brown patch. One of the reasons I have a lot of issues with brown patch in my yard is because I missed out on my fertilizer this spring. I've been too lazy to go out and do it since then. But because I have that slower growing turf, the fungus has really been able to take hold and cause a lot of disease. Additionally, with brown patch, we can overseed with resistant varieties. Bluegrass tends to be much more resistant than fescue lawns. We don't want to water late in the evenings. And we can also always apply a fungicide at our first signs of diseases. And one thing that I had neglected to mention regarding this disease and why it's so important to help that turf grow quickly is because this disease only affects the blades. It does not affect the crown. It does not affect the root system. So even though you may have a fairly severe infestation of brown patch in your lawn, all that's going to happen is it's going to look bad for a little bit, but that turf will recover. And so if we are ensuring vigorous, good growing turf, it can often outgrow some of the issues with brown patch that we tend to see. The next one I'm going to mention is dollar spot. Dollar spot is probably one of our most common diseases, or well, probably one of the diseases that the most money is spent on, not only in the state of Nebraska, but across the entire country, especially in golf courses, but also in home lawns. Dollar spot is also caused by a fungus, Clarindia jacksonii. You may have known it as Sclerotinia homeocarpa, but about a few years ago, that name did change. But this fungus can affect all types of our cool season grasses. However, we tend to see it much more on bluegrass and on bentgrass. And we'll often see it kind of June through September, depending on the weather patterns. And this one, we often kind of get these small softball-sized patches. At largest, they'll be maybe about the size of a softball, with light tan or straw-colored leaf spots. And one of the things I want to draw your attention to with these leaf spots is similar to brown patch. They'll often have a fairly well-defined margin, but unlike brown patch, dollar spot will often stretch across the entire leaf blade. And when it does that, you may even get some pinching that occurs in the middle of that lesion to kind of produce a sort of hourglass type appearance on that turf. And here we can see the picture I have down here at the bottom does a really good job of showing that hourglass type symptomology that we tend to see with dollar spot. So this disease, again, can be, we can manage it with fungicides, but before we ever want to start thinking about a fungicide application, some of these cultural controls, we always want to make sure that we are including these non-chemical controls first. So deep and frequent watering. If we do a lot of frequent shallow watering, that encourages a heavy thatch layer, which provides a better environment for this fungus to infect. We also can managing our fertility can really help control dollar spot, and so making sure that we are doing frequent fertilizer applications based on the recommendation. So based on a soil test, not just throwing down your standard 10-10-10 or whatever it's going to be, but making sure that we're fertilizing lightly but frequently based on what the lawn needs. The other thing that's very, very effective with dollar spot is we have some great new cultivars that are very resistant to this fungus. And that's the picture that I have here on the right side of my screen. On the left side of the picture, we have a very susceptible cultivar of dollar spot that's really being overran with by this fungus. But then if you look to the right side of that image, we can see that cultivar is almost unaffected. So again, always be thinking about some of these cultural controls first. But if we are going to use a fungicide for dollar spot, and if it's an issue in your lawn, chances are you will have to use a fungicide application. But the most DMI fungicides tend to work the best as far as controlling this disease. Unfortunately, we're starting to see a lot of insensitivity to this group of DMI fungicides. And so in order to make sure that we can continue to use some of these DMI fungicides, it's very important to make sure that we're rotating fungicides with different modes of action, or maybe using a tank mix. So we're not just hitting the fungus with a single product at one time. Now, I mentioned we need to be rotating fungicides. You may decide to rotate a DMI fungicide with one of our QOI fungicides or a strobilurin fungicide. Unfortunately, research has shown that repeated use of these QOI fungicides tend to actually increase disease pressure. So again, really important to make sure that we are rotating that mode of action. The next one is Pythium blight. Pythium blight is favored by wet kind of cooler conditions, but we tend to see Pythium blight primarily on ryegrass, bentgrass, and bluegrass. And we often get these irregular kind of water-soaked greasy patches that occur. These patches may coalesce to form a very large blighted image like we have here on the bottom picture. But those large blighted areas will normally follow some sort of drainage pattern. Pythium is an oomycete, so it's not a true fungus, but it's one of our water molds. And it really needs saturated soils in order to spread. And so that's why we tend to see this disease occurring more following some of those drainage patterns. We can also have some aerial mycelia that form on the turf blades with Pythium blight. And here's another image that does a really good job of showing we have some of that mycelium, that's that white fluffy growth, but also just that dark greasy appearance that is very, very common with Pythium blight, especially if we're looking at a higher grown or a higher mowed turf. So as I mentioned, this disease tends to occur most where the turf is kind of in poorly drained, shady, wet areas. Some of the things that we really want to be thinking about is we really want to avoid over-fertilization for Pythium blight. We also want to avoid mowing wet turf. If we mow wet turf, we are actually spreading this fungus or this oomycete all across the lawn. And so the aerial mycelia that I would pointed out earlier that we can see on this picture as well, that will get stuck to the wheels of your lawnmower, and you may just have some nice areas across the lawn exactly following where you mow. You can also do anything that you can also do to improve drainage or airflow through the area can really decrease Pythium blight. Now, I had mentioned this one is not a true fungus, and so if we are dealing with Pythium in our yard and we would want to apply one of our standard broad spectrum fungicides, we would see very poor control on that. Again, because it's not a true fungus, it's an oomycete, one of our water molds. So in that case, we want to be looking at a product that specifically controls oomycetes, such as mefenoxam or Segway or metalaxyl are a few of them. The third most common disease that we see in the diagnostic clinic is summer patch. And actually, summer patch may be the most common disease that I see in the diagnostic clinic, primarily because we don't have any good foliar symptoms of this disease. So it will kill the entire blade of grass, but the way that we can identify it in the clinic is by looking for these black runner hypha along the root. And so we actually need to look at the roots and float them in order to try to identify that fungus that's just running along the root. We can also get some very rotted roots with summer patch, and so if you'd ever dig up an area of your yard that's severely infected, and you would put that side by side to a healthier area, you may see an image similar to this, where that rot is very, very evident. As far as management of this one, anything that we can do to reduce stress is very important. And unfortunately, even though we start to see summer patch right about this time of year, this is too late to be starting really any of our fungicide programs for it. And so with summer patch, this is one of those that we want to make note of in the spring. And once we have about 6 days of temperatures above 65 degrees Fahrenheit, or of soil temperatures above 65 degrees Fahrenheit, this fungus will become active, and that's when we want to start thinking about one of our fungicide applications. If we are going to apply a fungicide for this one, it's very important to irrigate shortly after that application, because we really want that fungicide to penetrate into the root zone. If it all stays on the grass blades, we're not going to see very good control of summer patch. Additionally, managing thatch is very critical for this one. The better we're able to manage thatch, the turf will dry out a little bit quicker, and the fungus won't be able to grow as quickly. Next one is anthracnose. Anthracnose is most commonly a disease on bent grass. We see it on bluegrass too, but as far as it being a true disease, I really only consider it to be a true disease on bent grass and annual bluegrass. Now, we can find it on any of our turf species, but normally that often means that there is a sign of some other stress occurring on the turf. Maybe it's excessive temperatures, so it could be heat stress, or maybe it's been overwatered, maybe there's too high of organic matter, or just imbalanced fertility. But one cool thing about anthracnose is that as we look at the lawn from a ways away, it may just kind of have a copper appearance, maybe look a little bit orange or red. But if we look at the turf under magnification, so even just a hand lens, a standard hand lens, we can often see these fungal structures that we have down here on this bottom center picture. And these are acervuli. And those are the fungal fruiting bodies that are diagnostic for anthracnose. Next one, leaf spot and melting out, very common we see it on, again, most of our cool grass or cool season turfs, caused by a whole bunch of different pathogens. They used to all be classified as helminthosporium leaf spots, but since then they've been broken up into 4, depending on what you would look at, maybe up to 7 different genera. But we often see leaf spot and melting out in April through June, and then we tend to see a reoccurrence of it in September through October, because this one tends to be favored by some cooler, wet weather. We don't see it near as much in the middle of summer when it's really hot. Here we have another good picture of just some of those leaf spots. Similar to the other diseases that I had mentioned, using improved cultivars, very important. Newer varieties tend to have some resistance. Making sure that we are fertilizing properly and irrigating properly. And again, if a fungicide is desired, applying one of our QOY fungicides, such as azoxystrobin in the spring, tends to be fairly effective for it. And the other one I'm going to spend time on is Ascochyta leaf blight. This one, we always get these kind of almost needle-like appearance of the tips of the turf. But with Ascochyta, we may see a lot of damage. And so if we were to have a situation like this is very, very severe Ascochyta. It's taken out a lot of this lawn, but Ascochyta tends to show up when we have other root stresses. And if we can manage those root stresses, within about 2 weeks, that lawn will go back to looking exactly perfect and just the way you want it to. So Ascochyta is not one that requires fungicides, but really you just want to be thinking about managing that root zone and doing anything you can to decrease overall stress on the root zone. I also have fairy rings. I talked about fairy rings last week when the fungi that we find in our lawns. So we can go to that if you want to. I also talked about slime molds last week, but these are two other diseases that we tend to see show up in the lawn. But if we're thinking about taking a sample of turf, we really want to make sure that we are, if we are collecting samples, we want to do that before fungicides have been applied. Once the fungicides have been applied, the fungus is likely going to be dead. And if it comes into me or another diagnostic clinic, another extension educator, we may not be able to find the fungal structures that we are really needing in order to make that proper diagnosis. And with that, we'll take any other questions that may have arose. I don't know if there were any in the chat box. And I know that was a lot of kind of disease overload went through a lot of stuff rather quickly.